But after tests, usually what people around me would be saying were things like, oh, that was the easiest test ever. And that would feel horrible, especially if you felt like you tried really hard and definitely was not the easiest test you've ever taken. Hey guys, this is Fati, your fake older sister. Dr. Fati. These are 5 things I wish I knew before going into medical school. The first thing is work ethic is way more important than intelligence. What makes medicine hard is the sheer amount of memorization, not necessarily the complexity of it. The people who make it through can't rely on just being naturally bright. And you can replace being smart with working hard, but you can't necessarily replace working hard with just being smart. I definitely want to touch on this in future videos because I have a lot to say about this subject, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to leave it there. Number 2, you have to work hard. And I know this is basically the same thing I said in tip number 1, but it does warrant repeating. Medicine is insanely hard. Going through it and going through medical school, you're going to be mentally, emotionally, and sometimes physically exhausted. And it's not the same as doing an advanced degree where you can, spread out your hard classes, take a harder course on a lighter semester. You're at the whim of whatever your medical school's curriculum is. Number 3, don't compare yourself to other people. So I got into a program right out of high school. I lived in 4 different countries before I graduated 12th grade. And that's not even including all the amount of times I moved within the United States. So there was a lot of transferring mid-year, bouncing back between different curriculums, and a lot of semesters where I kind of just missed school. So when I started medical school, I was surrounded by classmates who went to the best private schools in their states, schools that were specifically oriented towards medicine, science, and math, and everything else you can think of. I was also around a lot of students whose parents prepared them to be in the position that we were in, basically since they were talking. And along with all the other advantages that came with being a second or even third generation doctor. So this was insanely intimidating for me. As someone who is the first doctor in our family and one of the first females who even got through college, I was definitely alone in this. My school already had a very high attrition rate just from the sheer intensity of the first 2 years. So I was thinking, what are the chances that I can make it through, especially compared to everyone else around me? There's no chance I'd be able to do nearly as well as them. And if I had removed this one mentality from the first few years of school, I can't tell you how much less stressful that time would have been. Because this goes back to point number 1. The main thing that matters is how hard you're going to work. And again, I have a lot of other examples of proving this, but I'll touch on it in the future. Number 4, don't listen to the outside noise. And so what I mean by that is there are so many factors for whether a person does or doesn't succeed through medical school. And you'll hear people say all the time, oh, this person was so smart and they didn't get through, or, oh, this is the easiest semester in school, or worse, this is the hardest class you're going to take. This class is the number 1 indicator for how likely you are to succeed in medical school. So obviously, it's important to be smart about it and listen to people. So I guess the advice really should be listen, but don't internalize. My lowest points in school were almost always after tests. Number 1, because I was always insanely pessimistic about how I did. But after tests, usually what people around me would be saying were things like, oh, that was the easiest test ever. And that would feel horrible, especially if you felt like you tried really hard and definitely was not the easiest test you've ever taken. And now looking back, usually the people that would say things like that weren't necessarily the people who did well or got through it. Number 5, it's okay to enjoy your life outside of the hospital. Medicine does not need to be your number 1 priority just because you want to be a doctor. Go ahead and do things that don't necessarily help improve your CV. Make friends with people outside of medicine. If you feel the need and find a project that you're very passionate about, even outside of medicine, don't be scared about asking your school to take a year off. You're never going to get this time back again. And what people usually don't explain to you is that medical school can sometimes be the most flexible time in your medical career. Once you're in residency, you can't just take a year or two off just for fun. I was so fixated on finishing school on time. I didn't even think about what else could be making me happy at that moment and at that time in my life. I felt guilty about enjoying things outside of medicine. I kept thinking it was an indicator that I wasn't as motivated or as passionate about medicine as my classmates. I feel like when you start medical school or your medical journey, you're going to be around a lot of people whose number one passion is medicine and whose number one goal in life is to become a doctor. Everyone is so focused on saving lives and healing, but in reality, having that sole focus and having a zoomed in vision doesn't make you a good doctor. You have to be a well-rounded person. So some of the things I did, I was extremely passionate about being in my Muslim Student Association, and I was vice president of our government association. Things that had nothing to do with medicine. And now looking back, those are the things that I felt helped shape me the most in terms of my leadership and communication skills. Two things that have been vital for me in my success as a resident. So those are the 5 things I wish I had known before going into medicine. This video should really be titled The 10,000 Things I Wish I Had Known Before Starting Medicine. But if we're being honest, that would probably take 4 years of lectures and a ton of textbooks. So for now, I'm going to keep it at 5. So if you're a medical student or aspiring doctor, let me know which of these tips was the most helpful. Comment on what you agreed or disagreed with. And if you're later on in your training or done and you're attending, what would your top 5 things be that you wish you knew before you started medical school? Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you at our next follow-up.